Native Chronicles. What we're going to do today is we're going to make some of these cartridge dioramas. I put out a preview of this a few days ago and promised that I'd put together something to show how it's done. These dioramas are quite interesting to look at. They give people who don't know much about cartridges a chance to see what the various components are involved in them. You can make them, you know, like this one here. You can make smaller ones like this, and as you can see, what I'm using is old plaques from shooting competitions. So this is actually a great way to reuse these things, because normally these plaques, they just sit in the shelf somewhere and never get seen again. So kind of nice to get these things back out and into service again. Brings back memories of those times when you were out in those competitions. Like most of these are back in the 1980s. You can see you can go right up to more intricate styles of display. So, but the principle behind it is all the same as far as making them. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to show you the method that I use for making these. There's lots of different ways of doing it, of course, and be very open to hear your suggestions on improvements to this. What I strove for when I made them was to keep the system simple. I'd like to just spend less than a day making something like this, so I go with fairly easy to find materials and easy construction techniques, and I think probably for a lot of people that's what their preference is too. So you don't have to get too fancy, but there's definitely a lot of things you could do that could improve this process and make the end product even fancier and more professional looking. But I'm no professional, so I think these look nice just like they are. So what we're going to do is start with taking a look at what kind of materials and tools you need in order to make one of these things. Here I have laid out the various materials that I need in order to complete this project. The cartridge that I'm going to use for this video is going to be a 45-120. This is a mighty big cartridge, a 535 grain bullet, cast bullet. I cast these things myself. You can see my stash of bullets that I accumulate, and I have a case for that bullet, and I have a bullet. I picked out an especially nice one and a gas check for it. I also have a bit of the cotton batten that goes on top of the charge, because this 45-120 is originally a black powder cartridge, but I loaded up for smokeless, so I fill up the empty case capacity a little bit with some cotton batten. Moving along, there's my gas checks. These are made out of beer cans, by the way, using these tools. And here's a sample diorama, and I have some gunpowder. I find that the IMR 3031 works quite well. I have also a piece of rod for making the stand, and in the past I've used just coat hanger wire, but really the just picking up a piece of brass rod from the hardware store, that works pretty good too. So I'm gonna make my first one using this brass rod. The next thing is some sort of a base. Now, I haven't really gone through picking out the very best trophies I've won. I've picked out the bases that just look the nicest, and I like the looks of this base. It's second place in the AAA revolver competition for IMSA, the handgun metallic silhouette shooting competitions. Now we have some side cutters, a pen for making marks to measure, and a ruler, and a piece of paper and toothpicks to mix epoxy, and yes, there's our epoxy. It's quite important to have a clear epoxy. Most epoxies aren't clear, so make sure you get yourself a clear epoxy. I'm using this Gorilla brand, which works quite well. And then finally, you're going to need a drill and some drill bits to choose from. And I think that covers pretty well everything that we need. Okay, the first step in this process is to plan what dimensions you're going to need for making your diorama. Now you can see here I have a sample one, and this is a matter of taste, but you've got to decide how high you want to have this bullet display off the base. And in the case of this one, I kind of like this height, so it's that high, but actually I want to measure from the base and call it about 4.5 inches high. And when I take the case that I plan to use, it's going to be totally different now. This 45-120 is like a 3¼ inch long case. So I want to get an idea of how much I'm going to need for my rod that I have to cut. Okay, so because I have to know where I'm going to bend all this. So measuring from here and looking at the case the way it would be sitting on the rod, knowing that I have to have some gunpowder here, and in the case of this one I've also got to have some cotton batting here, I'm guessing that 7 inches will be about right for the length that this has to come out. And that 7 inches is going to make it stick out a little bit past the base that I intend to use, which is okay. Now the height being 4.5 inches, that has to be double, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this rod and I'm going to bend it at the bottom and then bring it right back up, and then have a little crook on the side come out to hold the primer. And I've kind of sat down and I've written out a little bit what my plan is going to be. It's very simple, but really it does help to write this down. Just draw up a quick little plan of what you're going to do. So I got two 4 by 4.5 inch pieces, and this is how I'm going to go about making this thing. So knowing that, I've added up all my dimensions and I'm looking at 16.5 inches. I'm going to cut it a little bit longer than 16.5 because I want to have a little bit more purchase on the end of this small piece when I'm bending it. So instead of 16.5, I'm going to call it, oh, let's say about 18 inches, just to be on the safe side. So I'll take my ruler here, and I'm going to take off 18 inches here. So there's my 18 inches. Now, using this rod for the first time, this brass rod, and I'm not actually positive how well these little side cutters are going to work for cutting it, so I may have to cut it with a hacksaw, but let's see if I can do it just like this. Oh boy, that's pretty tough. Got 2 breaks. Okay, so that piece is shot all over the place here. Okay, so now I have my 18-inch rod, and we're going to go about bending it. Well, the way I'd like to bend it is I want to do this bottom bend first. There's lots of ways to do it, but I'm going to do the bottom bend first, using a vise and a hammer to make it bend at sharp angles, and then I'm going to bend out these 2 pieces so that they come out even. So let's get about doing that. Okay, I have my piece of rod here, and I've marked off an 11.5 inch point from the tip here. That's where I'm going to make that bottom bend on this rod. So let's see how this works here. And just pinch this in there, good and tight, vertical. And let's see if we can bend this rod, get it. Come over here. There, that's not too bad. I'm gonna give it a little tap, make sure it gets a nice strong. Actually, this is gonna come right around, so I'm just gonna bring it right around like that. And let's loosen her off. This is gonna be the tightest bend in the rod. So you can see here, we've got a rod, and I wanna bring that right up tight. So let's see if I can just kind of pinch this in here. And if possible, I want to get these two rods so that they meet right in line with each other. That's quite important. So that's going to make for the stand being better looking. So I'm bending it, squishing down these jaws, trying to hold this thing so it stays in line. Let's see if I can accomplish this. Nice tight bend there. Okay, I'm going to raise it up a little bit so I can get right on the bulb. Make sure you have enough wiggle room. Okay, let's tighten that up. Okay, I'll tighten this baby right up. Oh, there, tighten it up so much that it crossed over there. Okay, that's pretty good. Doesn't have to be perfect on the bottom there, but I didn't want to have this come out like that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just try to straighten this out a little bit. Okay, we'll just clamp this in here. This is kind of a cheap vise I got here. Yeah, let's just. Oh no! Oh, I broke it. Okay, so wound up breaking this piece of rod, but that's no big deal. These two rods, we're not building a bridge here or anything, so these two rods can be. They were going to be glued together anyways to keep them nicely in line. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to take each of these rods in turn. And I've made a mark on each of them, and I'm going to bend the one out and the other out the other way, one at a time. In fact, maybe this is going to make it even easier. Just got to make sure I've got this bend coming this way here. Maybe I'll make a little mark, make sure I get my mark right here, get it right around so I can see where I'm going here. Okay, there we go. Get my cheap little vise working. I'm going to bend this out away from that bottom bend, and I'm going to make it right on the center of that mark, and we'll bend this over. Okay, bend it straight over. Give it a little tap. That should be pretty good. I'll take this guy out. Maybe a little bit too much. There we go. Nice right angle. Let's get the next guy. I'll get my marks to come right around. These wax pens are actually pretty handy for marking everything you want to mark. And the markings can be removed later too if you want that way. So we'll take this guy, put him right at the center of the mark as well. Make sure I got it oriented away. Yeah. Okay. Let's bend that one away. Give it a little tap. There we go. Now we have our next one. So this is going to be the leg that the cartridge case rests on. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is I've taken these two pieces of wire, and I want to glue the two pieces of wire together so they stay put. And so I've just used a pair of vice grips, and I'm clamping them so that when they are together it looks nice like that, and they're both in line, so everything is in position. And the next thing I've got to do is I've got to make myself a batch of epoxy. So I'm going to try to use up some of this old Gorilla epoxy. It's getting pretty stale and very thick, so I don't know how well it's going to work. I'm going to have to push on it like crazy to get anything out of there. And the trick is to try to get equal amounts of it out. Okay, let's see if this does the trick. I'm going to take a little cloth, wipe off the excess here so I don't get setting in the nozzles. Get that wiped right off. There we go. Let's mix some of this stuff up. I got it on the right ones. Okay, so let's mix this stuff. This is 5-minute epoxy, so it should take roughly 5 minutes to set, depending on how evenly you've mixed it too, I think. But I'm gonna get this stuff good and mix first. I don't mind it if this stuff sets a little bit first, because it's easier to work with if it's a little bit stiff. So I'm going to work this around a little bit, make sure I get a good mix. Once you get that mix, now the reason I've put those two pieces of wire in vice grips is because I need some way of keeping this wire off of any surface while this epoxy dries. So by having it in some vice grips, I can suspend it in the air, and I can sort of get it to sit without dripping. If you lay it down on a piece of hard surface, then you're going to wind up with it being glued to that surface. This epoxy is really stiff stuff, eh? Then you wind up with your pulling off paper or whatever it is stuck onto the epoxy. This is going on pretty nicely. Put it on both sides. As you can see, I've got plenty of epoxy mixed for this. And the fact that it's clear, I guess I should have this so you can see as I put this on here. I'm just filling up the gap like a fillet between these two wires. This is going to hold them very, very nice and steady, strong together. As I said before, we're not building a bridge, just a little diorama. So this will be plenty good enough. And the other dioramas I showed you, they're done the same way, where the wires are glued together like this, even though I managed to get them to bend properly. Okay, so now I've done both sides of the wire here, and it's time to just let it sit. But while I let it sit, I'm going to be watching it, because the stuff likes to run a little bit, and I'll just kind of keep on rotating it. There's a blob developing down here. Like, it could easily run right down to the vice grip jaws and then wind up gluing the vice grips to the piece of wire too. So I'm going to watch this for a little bit, and the next step we're going to get on to making the rest of this diorama. Okay, the next step is we're going to have to get the primer hole opened up a little bit so that it can fit the rod through it. I don't want to make this overly big, but it's pretty hard to get it precise. So I picked out the closest drill bit I can find, and I'm going to drill a hole through this. And although it won't be precise, the way you work with this epoxy is it can forgive a lot of fitting sins, because you can hold things in place, gloop it in there, and just get it to line up just the way you want, and then leave it like that. So I'm going to just wrap this case with a cloth just for a little bit of protection. Let's see. Okay, I think I got her here. Let's give this another shot. It's going to try to twist away as it goes through. There we go. There. Now, if you can see that, we have the hole opened up nicely, and I'll test to see if this rod can get through there. It's a nice tight fit. I think I can just barely, maybe. It's pretty tight. Let's see about the other end. Yeah, it fits through there just nice and tight. That's actually a pretty good fit. So I can slide that on there, and I'll have this case on there. The better a fit you can get, on this, the easier it is to glue it in place and get it aligned. So next thing we do is I'm going to get some epoxy, and we'll put that in the hole there, and I'm going to hold it in alignment and let it set on there and get this case perfectly aligned with the rod if I can. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue the primer pocket onto the rod here. Now I want the case to be something like this distance away when it's done, but I'm going to slide it ahead a little bit like so. I've got my epoxy made up here, so this is a kind of a ticklish operation here. But I'm I'm going to try to get this glue right into this. I'm going to blob it around the rod itself. Let's see what I'm doing there. And I'm going to let it run down into the primer pocket. There we go. Okay, so now that I have that in there, I'm going to put that on there like so. Work this out, setting it down so that it, I want this to line up nicely. I'm going to take this out of here. Okay, but we've got time to do this, so not a big rush. Just get your alignments right. See here, just trying to make sure that I get the rod centered exactly in the center of that case. I can go and move just a little bit this way and that, and I should be okay. Yep. Okay, so now just a matter of letting that sit there for a while and let it get centered. I could this underneath there a little bit to support it. And you just do this right the first time and you won't have to do it again. Because if it's even a little bit off center, you'll notice it all the time. But I think I have it pretty good here now. It's see the you notice I've trimmed off that little piece on the end for the primer to go onto, and I've got the rod coming right through the center of the case and supported on the little temporary jig. I just use pieces of paper to build up the height that I need to support the case and to get everything aligned. So that should, now this is something that you're probably going to want to let sit for a while because it's pretty delicate. So I'm not going to move it around too much. I might scoop a little bit of the any epoxy that drips out. If it wants to drip out the bottom, I can scoop that out now before things get hard. Kind of get what I mean there, eh? Until the stuff gels up good. You gotta watch this epoxy. It looks like it's sitting there in one place, but you come back after a few minutes and then you find there's a big drip right down onto the paper or something like that. So just kind of keep an eye on it for a bit. And with this having seated in the primer pocket, if there's any gaps, I can mix up on another batch once this is solidly dried in there, and then I'll just add a little bit more filleting of epoxy to hold this case good. It may not seem like a super strong joint when you do this, but it doesn't have to be a super strong joint. The case itself is not terribly heavy, and you don't have to overdo it. It's going to be sitting as a display. It's not something being bumped around and thrown around the place. So I'm going to let this sit here now for a while before we move on to our next step. Okay, now that we have the case glued onto the rod, the next step is to get this bullet so that it's going to sit onto the end of the rod. And in order to do that, just like I drilled out the base of that case, I'm going to have to drill a hole into the center of this bullet. Fortunately, I have lots of cast bullets, so if one doesn't work, I'll just do another one. But this is not terribly hard. Main thing is to get that hole really centered into the base of this bullet. And in order to get a good start on it, I'm going to get a I'm going to make a little mark right onto the center of it to get the drill bit started. And I'll just take a little punch and mark my center point here. So that should give me hopefully a good start with the drill bit. And I don't want to really clamp this bullet into a vise because it's made out of lead, and clamping it is just going to deform the bullet. So I'm going to have to hold this thing by hand while I drill it. I want to drill, in the case of this bullet, this is 535 grains. It's really a hunk of lead. I'm going to have to drill it, I think, fairly deep into the bullet to make sure that the rod gets some good support inside there. So I would say at least this far in. So we'll see how it goes. One of the, having done this before, the bullet will tend to torque around the drill bit, so I'm going to have to hold it really tight. I'm going to use a cloth to hold the bullet, get a good grip on it while I drill it. And I'm doing all this stuff just live as I go, so we'll see how this works. Okay, let's give this thing a shot here. Now, doing it this way, it's pretty hard to, you have to just go by eye to get it lined up. But it's going to be a little bit of a loose fit on the rod anyways, and the epoxy I can use to adjust it anyhow. So I'm taking a look down, left, right, up and above, seeing if I'm going slow, just to adjust my alignment as I go. I'll take a look at it. Okay, so I think my alignment's good. Not perfectly centered in the bullet, but it's close enough. Okay. Okay, she's starting to spin on the bit. Oh yeah, she's spinning really good now. How deep have I got it? Okay, gonna have to. Let's see, how deep am I? Let's take this rod here. No, That's actually going to be deep enough, I think, to hold this thing. It's not terribly deep, but actually once it's on there, I'm not going to mess with it too much because that sits on there nice and solid, and I think I can glue it in such a way that it sits on there nice and straight. So there's my bullet on a sample piece of rod, and I think we should be able to make this work. Okay, another part of this equation I'm going to have to consider is that I'm going to have a small gas check on the rod of this diorama, kind of like what's shown here, that little gas check. And in addition to that, I'm also going to want to have a piece of cotton batten on the rod. So I should get these things put on the rod before I put the bullet onto the end, which I have made ready to glue on. So these gas checks are made out of beer can metal, so they're quite thin. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this, I'm going to center it as best I can, and I'm just going to punch it through. So hopefully, yeah, you should be able to see that, eh? I'm going to punch it through. Going to be a little bit conservative. Take that out. This bit of mine is a bit squared on the end, so I'm just rotating at 90 degrees. I'm going to give it a little bit more. When I get it to the right diameter, then this rod should fit. Being a tapered punch, I can make that hole as big as I want, depending on how deep I pound it into the wood. So if I look at this, I don't want to bend this little gas check too much. There. So that's actually a pretty good fit. I'm going to put that on the rod. I'll take this guy off, and I have a nicely centered gas check. Now, in addition to that, I'm also going to be using this cotton batten here, and rather than try to wrap it around the rod, I think I'm just going to make a nice little guide hole through it. I can do that the same way. So now, once I have this guide hole through, I should be able to punch it through quite centered on there, and that's also going to be glued onto this rod. I get it kind of halfway right there. So I have that, and I'm going to have that piece, that gas check on in front of it, and then the bullet in front of it. So this is going to be interesting. The last part is going to be, well, next part is going to be putting the gunpowder on, but I want to get this part on there. Yeah, you know, I might want to do the, not sure if I want to put the gunpowder on the rod now. Problem with the gunpowder, when you put that on the rod, and if we take a look at this here, you have to kind of strategize a little bit. There's something to be said for putting depends on how tight it gets. You know, what I'm gonna wind up doing is I'm gonna have to gloop the epoxy on here, and then I'm gonna sprinkle the gunpowder onto the setting epoxy to make it accumulate, in case you were wondering how I did that. Now that can be a little bit of a messy job, and I don't want to get any of that gunpowder falling onto the gas check or the cotton batten. So I'm a little reluctant to put the bullet and the gas check and the cotton batten on at this stage. The only thing that gives me a bit of pause is that I have to set that bullet on there nice and aligned with the shaft. So that means I have to lay this system down. That's why I haven't put it into the base yet either, this rod, because I have more maneuverability to take this case attached to the rod now and lay it in positions where I can let the epoxy set with the bullet aligned. And I was a little bit afraid that if I have the gunpowder on there, that might interfere with that, but actually I think I can make it work. So some of this stuff, you just have to give it your best guess and proceed from there. So I think what I'm going to do next, now that I have the cotton batten done and the gas check drilled and the bullet drilled, I should go ahead and put that gunpowder onto this shaft. That's probably the part that most people want to see done anyways, right? Okay, let's give this a shot. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to apply the gunpowder to the shaft of this device here. And this is the most ticklish part of the whole process, and maybe the one that raises the most questions in people's minds when they see a diorama, how they want to have that done. I know I've been asked to cover this part of it very carefully and thoroughly, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you exactly how I do this, basically in real time. And this is going to involve paying a lot of attention to the flow of the epoxy and the hardness and the stiffness of it, and sprinkling the gunpowder. So you want to have everything all ready. Now, what I prefer to do is I want to have my gunpowder, and I'm just putting lots in here. I want to have that gunpowder nice and handy so that I can just take it and I can sprinkle it, okay? It's got to be, and this is the reason I like IMR 3031, is that it's got kind of nice long grain to it, and it seems to stick to the rod just and build up in a nice fashion. So now that I have the gunpowder ready, next thing to do is to just mix up a good batch of epoxy and let it start to stiffen a little bit before I apply it onto the rod. Now that's kind of one of the ticklish parts of this, is you don't want the epoxy to set so much that you can't apply it to the rod, but you don't want it so thin that it's just dripping off the rod as you apply it. So I'm going to have some sort of a good stick for applying it to, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use just the tip of a Q-tip, just cut the little blob off that. I think just the rod of it. If it's not stiff enough to hang on to the tip of this rod to apply, then it's not stiff enough set yet anyways to apply. So let's get on to this part of it next. I'm going to mix up a batch of epoxy, and while I do this I'm going to do it real time, so you can even time it yourself to see how long you should wait before you apply it. Okay, I've created my little puddle of epoxy here. I'm going to mix this stuff up. I think this should be enough. As I said before, better to have a little too much than not enough. This should be enough. So you can see what I'm doing here is I'm going to let this thing film steady without any editing right through the whole process. Okay, this part of the video is going to take a little while, but I think it's actually very worthwhile to let you see exactly how this is done. This is only the 6th time I've done it, and the last time I did it was probably about 2 years ago, so it's not like it's something I do every day. But I have some idea how this is going to go. And it involves a lot of twirling the rod around as you apply this epoxy to it. Because when you put the epoxy on the rod, it's going to droop and try to drip off. And the only way to keep it from dripping off is to keep rotating the rod. But at the same time, as you're doing that, you're going to be sprinkling a little bit of gunpowder onto it. It's not rocket science. It's just a matter of just being intense for a little while, paying real close attention, observing what's happening, and taking corrective actions as you go along. I'm going to make sure this epoxy is really well mixed. That does help in getting it to set sooner. I try to make sure I've got as equal a portion of the two components as possible. And now you can see that thickness of the epoxy is it's not, you can see it's going to drip off the rod pretty easily like this, right? And honestly, I could just start applying it to the rod right now, but I might as well wait for a little bit, because the closer I wait it gets to being set, the easier and the less twirling that's going to be involved. So that's why I'm letting this camera run. This part of the video is maybe a little boring as we sit here and watch paint dry, so to speak, but that's part of the process here. And you can see as I'm doing this, I'm thinking about how much where I'm going to position that bullet. You know, it's going to be somewhere around there, so if I have a blob of gunpowder here, then I got a little bit of room to put some of the cotton batten here, and the gas check there, and then the bullet at the end. So I think I might want to have the gunpowder end right about here and start right about there, something like that. And I'm going to try, you can build up this gunpowder quite deep if you want. It's because once you apply some of this goopy stuff onto the rod and you sprinkle the gunpowder on it right away and then start rotating it, right? And once you start rotating it, that blob rotates around the shaft, but you put the gunpowder on there and it starts to make it thicker too. So that's another thing to keep in mind with this. And I'm letting this stuff just sit here. It's like watching paint dry. It doesn't seem like it's getting any stiffer, but as that chemical reaction starts to take place, this will get stiffer. No doubt about it. But this is a fun little activity to do. See, now when I lift it up, it's holding on to a blob a little bit more, but you can see there that blob start to drip down. But actually I could rotate it if that was on the rod, and then the blob will start to fall down this way, and then it'll start to fall down this way. See that, eh? But if I rotate it, then the blob just keeps on. It's kind of like blowing glass, you know. Rotate it as you do it. And I would like to get it maybe a little thicker. Doesn't hurt to keep on stirring this stuff. It's getting there. And you can get an idea of how much time you've got left by just picking up these things and just rotating it and seeing how that blob, how fast it takes for that blob to start coming off the shaft of that applicator stick. Might as well do the testing with the applicator stick. See, I'm going to get quite a bit onto that rod. It's getting thicker. It's definitely getting thicker. Okay, let's see here. I'm a very impatient type of person. You know, I'm kind of like I'm ready to go here, but I could wait longer. I just don't have the patience, I think. Let's see if I got a big blob on here. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start applying this stuff. Okay, the heck with it. And I'm going to put some on this side. And I'll put some on this side. And you can see this stuff is just going to run like crazy, eh? It's going to run around. Wants to droop around, but that's okay. Okay, now I think I've got a pretty good blob of this stuff. Let's just start sprinkling some of this gunpowder on here. I'm going to move this over to the side. You notice I've made a little, put down a little piece of cloth here. You see that? It's okay to make a mess here, but let's just get some of this stuff. It's really just a matter of, the gunpowder sticks on there like nothing. Okay, now you can see I'm already getting a pretty good glob of this stuff on there. I could put a little more. Okay, it's okay to do this, add it on afterwards too. Okay. This epoxy is starting to set already pretty good. Okay. So now I got that on there. Oh yeah, that's coming along pretty nicely. Now if I want to build up that ball, then I'm just going to add a little bit more to the areas where now the epoxy is getting quite stiff here. In fact, it's so stiff I've got to kind of twirl it to get it off the stick. Okay. Yeah, it's so stiff. I don't know if I'm going to get much more on here. Okay. Gonna just push around a little bit. Hopefully you can see that. Now what I could do, this epoxy, I've let it get so stiff. Notice I'm continuing to rotate it. I can make up another batch of epoxy that's a little bit thinner now and apply it over top of this and put a second coat on it. And that's what I just might do. Okay, see that a little bit? But already it's built up quite good. This case does have a large powder capacity. So to tell you the truth, I am quite tempted to make up another batch of epoxy and apply this to it as well. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just keep on applying, rotating this blob here until it doesn't sag anymore. Because as I said before, you can be surprised. You would leave it sit for a little while and you come back and then you find it's all sagged one direction or the other. So the main thing right now is to get this core on there good. And once this core is on there good, then we'll be good to go for adding a little bit more fresh epoxy onto it. And I'm going to sprinkle a little bit more onto this. Okay, so I hope that's becoming pretty clear. I'm just going to keep on rotating this sucker. It's actually getting pretty solid now, and I can see from my stick in the stirring there that it's getting hard to move that stick. That's another way to tell if you've got if the epoxy is starting to set or not. So let's mix up another batch here and give it another shot. Okay, I'll be right back. Okay, I have another batch of epoxy mixed up now, and I'm going to take that. This is where it actually gets a little bit easier. This batch of epoxy, I'm not going to let it sit as long, because once you have a blob built up on there, it's easier for the epoxy to hold on to onto the rod. It's got more to hold on to, but I am going to try to build it up a little bit more towards the back. That's what I'm going to focus on. Seems to me it could have gone a little further to the back last time, closer to the case is what I mean. So I'm going to build it up here a little bit. I'm going to keep on rotating and rotating this baby. You can see it wants to blob and fall over pretty easy. And I'm doing this very soon after having mixed the batch. So I have actually quite a thin the epoxy is quite thin and able to spread easily right now. Okay, this is quite important. So I want to build the ball out a little bit more too at the same time. Boy, I think I got just barely enough epoxy too, so hopefully this is going to be about right. Okay, so let's just get some of this stuff sprinkling on there. It's okay to be a little bit messy. Okay. It is what it is. Yeah, I'm getting a nice little ball built up there. Yeah, maybe I'll get some of this. Wherever I see some wet epoxy, I'm dribbling this stuff on. There's some wet epoxy there. Okay, so I'll just keep on. Actually, and it doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, it doesn't have to be perfect shape, because the imperfection is part of the beauty of it, you know? Okay, let's see here. Let me put a little bit more on here. And by the way, while we're doing this gunpowder that's good. Oh, I lost a little chunk. Oh, doggone it. Maybe I can just pick it up and drop them on there. Yeah. Yeah. A little piece fell off. You can mold it. A little piece fell off there. That piece wants to keep on coming off. So, yeah, maybe should have rotated a little bit more while I was working on it. But actually, that's coming along not too bad. I don't want to get too excited about this. If I don't like the shape of it, always add some more epoxy to it and build it out some more. Not sure if I'm going to. Kind of look at this a little bit, and I might add some more epoxy to it and build it up a little more. You want to have kind of the amount of gunpowder sticking on here that would represent roughly how much would go in the case, right? That's part of the idea. And actually, what goes into this case is, when it comes to smokeless powder, it's only filled at half full. And that's maybe a little less than what would represent half full in this case. So I could be excused for adding a little more. I just might do that. It's worth doing. It might as well do it right? Okay, so maybe I'll build out the back part of it a little bit. Apply a little bit of epoxy to there. You don't have to do too much. I really glooped it on this time, so that made it. And you notice I'm just continuing to rotate this. That's the idea here. Keep on rotating it until that epoxy sets. And if you're not sure if it's setting, you kind of feel, test your stir stick in the pool of epoxy you made, and see how stiff it is to move that pool that you mixed up. And it's fairly stiff now, but it's still quite fluid. So I think I'm gonna let this rotate a little bit longer, and I think I'll make up another batch and sprinkle a little bit more on there, because I want a good pile of gunpowder around this rod. I'll be right back with that. Okay, let's go at this one the third time. I'm going to pick up a little gloop of this stuff here and apply it all around. Trying to build up more of this back part this time. Apply it to the areas where I want to build it up more. Okay, pretty well used up all my epoxy that I have for this, and I think this is going to work out okay. Hopefully so. You notice that the epoxy isn't running quite so quick and easy now. Now, as a little side note, all this gunpowder I'm using here, you don't want to be using that again for your reloading, okay? Because this stuff is, oh, some big chunk just fell off there. Because it's contaminated now with epoxy. So anything that's fallen onto the paper here now is garbage. You've got to dispose of it. But I'm getting a nice big ball of this built up now. I think it's starting to look fairly representative of what the charge would be in this case. As I said, this is smokeless powder. This case is only being filled half full. It doesn't have to be exact. You can exaggerate it too if you want. Take artistic license with this. But actually I think this ball is looking quite nice now. Just being liberal with that gunpowder. And I'm going to just stop here because it's looking quite good. And I'm just going to focus now on revolving this rod for a while the epoxy sets, just giving it a chance to set there. And afterwards there might be a few grains that fall off later, but that's okay. I think, yeah, I don't have any shiny spots of resin left, indicating that I need to apply, if it was shiny blobs of resin on here, then I would just sprinkle gunpowder onto it. But it's laying in there actually quite nicely. Now, another thing I should mention is this being live gunpowder, this is not something that you would want to sell to people, I don't think, because you're going to be shipping a highly flammable substance to someone. This does present a real fire hazard. The gunpowder, this amount of gunpowder lit by a match, that's going to cause a huge flame. You don't believe me, just take a little bit of gunpowder sometime and outside and sprinkle this amount and light it with a flame, and you'll see it's a big torch that's going to come out. So this is a fire hazard in the home, along with the primer that gets added to it. So because of things like that, these homemade things really should just stay in the home. Use your best judgment on these things. Maybe you want to consult your homeowner's insurance policy, things like that. But just something to consider. It is flammable stuff. And this gunpowder that I've allowed to sprinkle onto the paper below, I'm going to just gather that up and I'm going to dispose of it, so that I don't accidentally use it in the gunpowder charge sometime in the future. I'm going to give it lots of time to just set itself in the epoxy. There's no sense rushing things. This is a critical part of the whole diorama here, getting this gunpowder pile to form nicely. And I think that's what we've achieved here. So now that we've got that done, I'm going to put a little piece of cotton batting on the front and a gas check. and then the bullet on the end of this rod, and then on this end I'm going to attach a primer, and finally what we do is we embed this whole assembly into the base. So there's nothing impossible about doing this stuff. It's just a little bit of fiddly work, but very satisfying once you have it done. Okay, so now I haven't let this gunpowder set for very long, but I think I'm safe to go and try to apply this bit of cotton batten to the rod. If things go well, I might even try attaching the gas check on. We'll see how that goes. I'm just going to smear a little bit of this on, epoxy on there. See how well this goes here. Okay. Now this is going to be a very delicate thing. Squish it on there a little bit. Never done the cotton ball onto the rod before. This is a little bit new, but this is actually the amount of cotton ball that I put in the case. I think it's 2 grains worth. I kind of rotate it a bit so the nicest part of it is facing there. Okay, so I got that on there. I wonder if I can be so brave as to try to put this gas check on here. If I can get it started. Yeah, I can do that. Okay, let's give it a shot. Why not, eh? Okay. Now here's where you want to get things lined up just right. Maybe pick up any excess blob if you can. And this just might work, I think. See that there? So I got the gas check on, and I got the cotton batten on, all in one step here. I'm not going to try to do the bullet in the same step. Get too carried away here. That bullet, when I set that on there, I'm going to have to figure out some sort of a little jig for it to but I want to make sure that the gas check is on as straight as I can get it for now, especially while this glue is hardening. Seems to be pretty good though. Okay, so we got it's It's hard to shape that cotton batten any more than I have here, but it is just the way it is. That is how much cotton batten I put in the case, and I think I've sort of judged the right amount of gunpowder too. That represents what goes into the case. It's 40 grains of accurate 5744 is what I use. Now, while I'm just letting you watch this dry, I'll mention that I'm currently loading this round a little different now. I used to use gas checks on the bullet, and actually I don't anymore. I just use a plain-based bullet. No, actually I use a gas check bullet still. But I have been thinking of changing this load to leaving out the cotton batten. My testing has shown that when I fill the case with cotton batten, I get slightly more consistent velocity, muzzle velocities, especially if I test against holding the cartridge upright and then shooting it and pointing it down, letting the powder shift down in the case and shooting it. But not that bad either way. And you know, I'm a little reluctant to have cotton batten in the case, but I've put about many hundred rounds of this load with the cotton batten through the gun, and it's worked just fine. But maybe I'm pushing my luck, I don't know. I'm a little bit conflicted about using cotton batten in the case for filler, actually, or any kind of filler, because the benefit is so slight. The gas check I definitely have to use. And before, what I used to use is I used to have this bullet, and I would heat treat them in the oven and harden them up to a little over 20 BHN. And because I'm pushing the bullet fast, I got a lot of case capacity, so I can push these bullets very fast if I want to, much faster than I am right now even. And if I were to do that, when I push them at around 1600 feet per second, that's when you start to get leading problems unless you use a very hard alloy. But now we're using a gas check made out of beer cans. That's made all the difference. I just used my regular wheel weight metal with a bit of linotype and 50-50 bar solder mixed in for the alloy, and I let the bullets air cool and I guess they're around 15 BHN, and I get no leading at all and good accuracy. So that's the way I load this cartridge now. This gas check, even though this is a plain base bullet, but the gas check is so thin, being made out of beer can metal, that it swages right onto the base of the bullet just nicely when you pass it through the lubricizer. Just in case you're wondering how that works, because you can gas check a plain base bullet. Maybe not something everybody knows. And you can actually buy gas checks that are made for plain base bullets, but I bought this Pat Marlin's set of dies to make these gas checks myself, just because I like to be as self-sufficient as possible, not have to depend on supply running out somewhere down the line. Okay, so I think we got this kind of set here now. I'm looking at my stir stick. It's kind of sitting in there pretty stiff, so it looks like we got this part here beat. Let's move on next to putting the bullet and the primer on this system. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the step of putting this bullet onto the rod. I'm going to take some of this epoxy and fill that little hole up real good. Now, I've been doing some test fitting of this bullet, and holding it like this, it would appear that I can just pop this guy on there like so. Now, to get it just right on the shaft, you want to get that thing lined up there proper. But it seems to me that I have this thing figured out pretty close here. So I can let this bullet just sit here. You know, try to pick off any little bit of epoxy that's dripping down, but you know, it looks actually pretty good. It's lining up there nicely. Look from all sides. Look for little blobs of epoxy coming out. It's okay to have a little bit. Okay. But you know, if I just let that sit there, I think we're going to have ourselves a good little diorama. That's one of the most critical parts of this process, getting that bullet to sit on there just right. And I think I've got that. So now I'm going to let this sit for a good long while. Make sure that that epoxy is well set, because it's carrying a pretty good load there with that bullet at the end of the wire. But if it's glued in good, it'll stay there. And of course, as I said before, these dioramas are not made for rough handling. So just going to have to be very gentle with it, working with it. But once that bullet is on there good and solid, then I can apply the primer onto the end, and we'll put this whole assembly onto the base. So let's give this a little time and see what happens next. Okay, now that we have the bullet glued onto the end of the shaft there, just got to put a primer on it, and I've mixed up a little batch of epoxy, and let's get to it and get this final part on there. So I have here some primers. I'm going to take one out. There's a primer. This is going to be a little bit tricky to do, but what I'm going to do, the way I'm going to do this, is I'm going to put a nice glob. Yeah, let me do this again here. I'm going to put a nice glob of epoxy on this primer. So I want a nice glob on there, and I'm going to set. Hopefully this works out okay. Okay, now I've got that. I'm going to move this primer into position here underneath this this tip here. See if we can get this done right the first time. Okay, I'm going to take this assembly out. I'm going to set tip in the primer, and I'm going to slide it over to here. I'm going to try to center it on there, like so. And you know what I'm going to have to do here, in this case, just going to have to wait it out, I think, until this thing sort of sets. Could do a lot of different ways and try to hold it up and clamp it, but really, 5 minutes for epoxy is not that bad, and I can live with that. Just hold it for now, I think. I'm kind of holding it against a steady surface, which helps to let the glue harden on, and because you don't want it wiggling while you're trying to have a joint solidify like that. So I won't, I'll just cut out the video while I wait for this to dry, and once we got this primer on the end, then we can move on to the final step, which is putting this assembly onto the base. Okay, we're ready for the next step in this process here. I've got some drill bits out. Got my base that I've chosen. It's a bit of a small base for this large diorama, but I think it'll work. I don't want to. One of the factors you got to consider too when choosing the base is some of the plaques can be very wide, and if you only have a narrow space to put it on your shelf, then you may want to go with something narrower. So that's one of these kind of considerations you got to have when choosing a base for your diorama. Put some thought into where are you going to display the diorama. So in my case, I have a very narrow shelf to put the diorama on, and that basically restricts me to a fairly narrow base. I do have some larger plaques, but I can't use them for that reason. So what I've done with this base here is I've taken a punch and I've made a little mark to mark where I'm going to drill. I'm going to drill right through this base. I've got a piece of wood underneath it. Now I'm going to put a pilot hole through it first, and then I'm going to use a larger bit, and then a larger bit, and then a larger bit again to open up this hole. Try to do it without destroying anything here. And I'm going to pass that drill bit right on through to the bottom now, because I want to get the maximum amount of bite that I can on this piece of wood, holding up that fairly significant weight. But when gluing it, I'm going to be filling that hole with epoxy, and what's going to happen is that as I fill it and I put the rod in, the epoxy is going to start coming out, and that's going to gloop out of the bottom here. So at that stage where I'm trying to mount the diorama rod in there, I'm going to be putting it somehow in a little jig to hold it in a perfectly level position, which is very critical. And I don't want that epoxy, I can't go underneath there and start filling with that epoxy to see if it's coming out on the bottom. So what I plan to do then is I'm going to put a piece of tape over the bottom of this when I'm done. Now, as luck would have it, this hole is going to line up right with this slot, which is actually not a bad thing, because the epoxy is going to fill in this little slot as it gloops through, and make a more sort of a button on the end of it. So let's see how this goes here. Just going to give it our best shot. I probably should use a drill press, but by eye, I think I can do it. Check my vertical. Now this may not be absolutely vertical, but the hole is going to be a little bigger than the rod anyways. There, now I've gone through. The hole's going to be a little bigger than the rod anyways, because it's kind of a flat shaped rod. So there's going to be play in there, and I expect that that I'll be able to wiggle the rod around anyways. So here I have a nice clean hole. Let's put in another bit and make that hole a bit bigger. Okay, I have a larger bit in here. Let's give it a try. Hopefully I'm not jumping up too large in size. Again, I'm gonna try to get my vertical. Yeah, I'm through. So okay, we're through with that one now, but that's still not big enough yet. So let's do a little step up another bit. Okay, now I have the largest bit that I have available. It'll fit in my drill, and I hope this goes okay. Okay, that's a little iffy. That's a little too big. I'll have to switch to a smaller bit first. Okay, let's try this one then. Not jumping up too large in the bit size. Oh man. Can't get this thing to start on there. You know, maybe if I came through on this end, it might be the better way to go. Let's try that. I don't like cutting outwards. Yeah, it's getting through there. Okay, let's see how that looks. Probably the best thing to do is to take it from the other side then. Okay, let's go to the next bigger bit this time from here and see if that works. Well, hopefully I'm not stepping up too large a size right off the bat here, but this is my maximum size here. So let's cross the fingers and hope this goes well. Oh yeah, that should work. Let's see if I'm getting through or not. Yeah, I'm getting through. Okay, so now I've got myself a hole through this base without too much damage, a little bit, but yeah, that's the best I can do. So I skipped around a little bit trying that big bit right off the bat, so I should have maybe realized that wasn't going to work and started with the softer material and coming out. But that's good. Okay, now I've given some thought to the gluing of the glue going through this hole that's going to hold up the stand, and that glue coming out
And I decided what I should do. First I thought I'd put a piece of tape or something like that under there, but that tape is going to stay stuck on there and it might develop a little bulge and things like that, and then the base may not sit flat anymore. So I thought, well, why not just cut out a thick piece of cardboard and glue this onto there first. So that's what I'm going to do now. Take some of this this fairly fast drying glue. And let's just put a little bit on there. Doesn't have to be strong. Just want it to be lined up just right. So I'm going to let that sit there for a little bit, and while I ponder how I'm going to support the diorama apparatus as it tries to harden. That is actually a bit of a challenge. How to hold that thing. Now you might think with 5-minute epoxy you can hold it, just hold it in position. In a way you sort of can and you sort of can't. I've done this a few times. It's a little bit like if you ever watch Survivor, you see those challenges where they have everybody competing to hold a ball on the end of a stick or something like that, and if they wiggle too much then the ball falls off and they're out. It's a little bit like that, you know, when you're holding something that's to get it set in epoxy for 5 minutes, maybe a little longer than that, especially with this weight, it needs more than that. To hold it steady just like this, you're just going to start to shake after a while, and that loosens the joint. So really, that's not a very good way to do it. I think it is possible, but I'm going to try to work out some sort of a jig to hold the assembly in place, and let it just harden up and leave it alone for a little while to really set. So we'll see what we can come up with for that. Okay, I've got the primer glued on, and I've given some thought to how to set the assembly into the base here in a stable fashion so that I can let that epoxy set really good. So what you can see I did here is I just came up with a little scheme here. I found a piece of plywood, a couple of lag bolts and nuts, and drilled a couple of holes through the bottom of that plywood, run up those lag nuts, found an old scrap piece of wood and drilled the holes right through it, and underneath you can see I have some nuts here. So that lets me adjust the height of this little bench here, and when I take the assembly out and put the stem into that hole there, then the case, the front of the case, will rest on the top of this ledge here. Now the one little complication is because the bullet is so heavy on the end, so front heavy, it tends to lift the base out. So what I've also added is a little sack here, a weight sack that I can hook on to the far end of it, and that will hold the rear end from tipping forward with the weight of the bullet. So I think this is going to work. I've kind of adjusted the height of that bench so that when the stem is sitting flat down flush, I can put that little bag of weights on it and then just get things lined up and then walk away from this thing and just leave her alone for a while to set. Now, in case you're wondering how I'm handling the assembly while I'm working on chores here, I'll just give you a quick look at that. See there, I've put the stem into a pair of vice grips and attached the vice grips to my vise just to hold this thing in an upright position while it's waiting between tasks, and that also makes it quite easy to get it in and out as I do some test fitting. So that thing is all sitting there ready to go. I've got my little jig made up, ready to go. And now all I have to do is just mix some epoxy and let's give this thing a shot. Okay, I've got my epoxy mixed up here. Let's scoop some of this into the hole. Try not to smear too much on the face of the plaque. I want to fill this hole up pretty good. Just fill it right up. It's good to do this while the epoxy is not too stiff, because by it being thin, you see there, I can just glop it right in there. Now I'm estimating how much I'll need to without too much overflow. Okay, so I'm going to take the assembly out now, and let's see how much. Oh, it actually can use a fair bit more. I'm gonna put this on the side here. I'm going to try to get a little more epoxy in here. I want to fill that right up. Now, as long as I have enough to get it to hold solid in there, then I'll be able to add some more epoxy and kind of stuff it in along the edges once it's set and held into position. So at this stage, even if all I can do is just get the stand to be strong and upright, then I'll be happy. Okay, let's try to dip this thing in there again. Oh yeah. That's more like it. I'll put that here. Sorry, my hands are in the way. I hang my little weights here and check this thing for line up. It's right down the center line of the right down the center line of the plaque. That's pretty good. Okay, I've checked this for level before. It should be good. So actually, if I leave this thing now alone, I think it should hold in place for as long as it takes to dry and become strong. And I've filled up that hole pretty good with epoxy, so I think it's going to be a strong joint. So let's leave this alone, and we'll come back to it later on when the next thing I'm going to do after this is I'm going to put a bullet, I think, right about there, a completed cartridge. So that's going to make it look nice. Okay, we're just setting the bullets on this pedestal as a final step of this process, and you can do it whatever way you like. Place this one on there. I'm going to place this one on. You don't need a lot of epoxy when you do this on the bottom of the cartridge. Now, one thing I've done with this one is I've placed one of the bullets on there with the grooves in the bullet lubricated, because I didn't do that one on the one that's sitting on the stand. So I want to give an idea. Here's a lubed bullet, and here's an unlubed bullet. This lubed bullet actually also has the gas check applied to it, showing that, you know, it's virtually invisible to see. So now I'm going to place this last one on here. Try to get it all kind of centered. And I think that looks just about right. And this guy's a little bit. I think that should pretty well do it. Okay, so now I have the cases placed on here. I'm just going to let this glue dry, and you know, I think I'm basically done with this. Well, I think that about does it for making the diorama that we started off with here. There was a lot of steps involved. I think you'll agree. I hope this video was helpful to you. We have now a finished diorama, and this is something that you can make on your own if you like. There's nothing impossible about it, no fancy tools, no special skills. It's a way of making something nice, maybe a thing to do for cold winter months. And as you go, you can make one of these for every cartridge you reload for. You can see I've finished this off with adding the cartridges onto the base here with the bullets. I mean, these dioramas are very useful too. If somebody is asking you how you make cast bullets, you just show them right here. You know, here's a cast bullet, and then you have to explain to them, well, how they might ask, well, what do you put in those rings there? Well, you can show this bullet here. Say that's what the bullet looks like after it has lubrication injected into it and a gas check applied to the bottom of it. So we have the whole story right here on this little diorama, and I think these things are just really neat. Very fun to make. So just take your time when you're doing it, think your way through. Also the order in which you do things. This video I attempted to give you a bit of a plan, a roadmap for where to start and which order to do the steps in. But feel free, of course, to come up with your own ideas. And in fact, for this video, I really appreciate it if people add in some ideas of their own, perhaps different materials, different techniques. There's so much that can be done on this, and as I began by saying, this is just the way I came up with doing it, and I'm sure there's 100 other ways too, but this is a good way to get a start. So to wrap up this video, I'd like to express my appreciation for you watching it, and I would also very much appreciate it
if you would subscribe to this channel. I know I ask for that at the end of every video. It's important to me. These videos do take a lot of work. I enjoy doing it, but your support is really appreciated, and if we can get the subscriber count up, that will really help out a lot. So please click subscribe to the video. Click the bell icon as well if you want to be notified when new videos come out. I'm trying to put one out every week or two. In fact, lately I think I've put 3 out in the last 2 weeks. So, you know, it goes up and down a little bit, and as the new ideas come along. And if there's something that you want me to talk about or show or demonstrate or follow up on, please let me know in the comments, and I'll definitely consider it. So as we close up, let's just take a quick review of the dioramas.